Good evening, visitors, and welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Jared Pratt, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Sub-Lieutenant Michael Barat. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony from across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial. If able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. If able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Corporal Albert Edward Flint. Albert Flint was born on the 9th of May 1917 in southern Sydney suburb of Bexley, the son of James and Maud Flint. He grew up in the area and probably attended a local state school before going to work as a labourer. Albert's father died in 1936 and his mother passed away 2 years later. On the 20th of June 1940, Albert Flint enlisted in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force at Paddington in Sydney. He was posted to the 6th Battalion and began training. He was found absent without leave in early January 1941 and confined to barracks for a week as punishment. But this didn't prevent him from marrying Gwyneth May Rollins on the 17th of January. Later in the month, he was transferred to the 2nd 19th Battalion, and in early February, he embarked from Sydney with his battalion bound for overseas service. Arriving in Singapore in mid-February, the 2nd 19th moved to southern Malaya, where it trained for service in tropical conditions. After spending most of September based around the airfield at Kluang, in early October the men began to move to Jamalawang, the site of a vital road junction where it prepared defensive positions. Flint was promoted to corporal on the 23rd of November 1941, a few weeks before his battalion was stood to the night of the 6th of December 1941. As Japanese forces pressed closer, in early January, D Company was detached to form half a special force deployed to delay the Japanese approach to Endau. On the 17th of January, the battalion was redeployed to the west coast, then rushed forward to reinforce the 2nd 29th Battalion of Buckaree. The battalion held the vital crossroad of Buckaree long enough to allow for the withdrawal of the remnants of the 2nd 29th and the 45th Indian Brigade. But the Japanese had already outflanked the 2nd 19th position, and on the morning of the 20th of January, the battalion began its torturous withdrawal, fighting its way through Japanese roadblocks consistently held from the rear and air, before being halted by strong positions around the bridge across from Simpang Keri River. With its ammunition exhausted, casualties mounting, and no chance of release, the force struck out through the jungle on the morning of the 23rd of January. It was forced to leave its wounded behind. They were subsequently massacred by the Japanese. Only 271 members of the 2nd 19th were mustered at Yongpeng, and the withdrawal to John Baru, where it received 650 reinforcements, and reorganisation and training commenced. By the time the battalion crossed the Singapore Island on the 31st of January, Flint had been listed as missing. It wasn't until March 1943 that Albert Flint was reported as being among roughly 2,000 Allied prisoners of war held at Sandakan camp in North Borneo, after being transferred there from Singapore as a part of B-Force. The 1,494 prisoners that made up B-Force had been transported from Changi in early 1942 on board the hell ship Abimaru. Arriving in mid-July, the prisoners marched to Sandakan, number 1 prisoner of war camp, where they were told they would construct an airfield. Conditions and food supplies were initially reasonable, but deteriorated in mid-1943, partly because of the arrival of the brutal Formosan guards. A small cage was built in the camp to punish prisoners for trivial offences. Some men were confined without being able to stand up and with little food for as long as a month. The situation worsened in 1944 with brutal beatings, torture, and shrinking food supplies. Prisoners suffered from malaria, beriberi, and tropical ulcers, and the numbers of men who were sick grew. Because of the lack of healthy prisoners for work parties, guards pulled sick men from their beds. In January 1945, the Japanese began a fair Allied invasion of Borneo and started to move prisoners away from the coast of Renau, a small village some 250 kilometres inland of the mountains. The first group of 470 prisoners, including 350 Australians, left in batches of 50. All of them were already weak with beriberi and malnutrition, and most lacked boots. Only 6 of some 2,500 Australian and British prisoners interned at Sandakan in northeastern Borneo would survive. Among the dead was Albert Flint, whose body was not recovered. He was presumed to have died of illness on the 10th of June 1945. He was just 28 years old. Today, he is commemorated on the Labuan Memorial, which commemorates over 2,000 officers and men of the Australian Army and Air Force who died whilst prisoners of war in Borneo. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right among almost 40,000 who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is on display today by the Pool of Reflection. This is one of but many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Corporal Albert Edward Flint, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
If able, please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support of the Memorials Development Project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you.